Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for today's Appraisal Buzzcast. We've been getting so many new listeners and subscribers recently. We really appreciate you all so much. If you haven't already subscribed, please take a second to click the subscribe button so you get notified when our latest Buzzcasts are published every week. Today, I'll be speaking with Jillian White of Better.com and Joan Trice, CEO of Allterra Group. The discussion today is a hot button topic. We'll be discussing racial and ethnic bias in the appraisal process. Joan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Jim, and welcome, Jillian. Been seeing a lot of you lately in Zoom land.
Yeah. Hi, Joan. Thanks for having me here.
Sure. Tell the audience a little bit about you and Better and what your role is there.
So I am a certified residential appraiser. I'll be celebrating 17 years appraising in February. I'm also an SRA. I'll be celebrating 5 years of that in October. And I have been with Better.com, which is a completely digital mortgage lender. It'll be 5 years in April. And so when I started at Better, I believe I'm employee number 53, also Black Hire number 1. And
Wow.
now we're at about, I think, 5,000 plus employees. Things have been growing tremendously. I think we had 1,000 employees in January of 2020, and now we're at 5,000. So it gives you an idea of the size and scope and pace of business. And so there, I'm the head of Collateral. I came in as being responsible for building out the appraisal team and the appraisal processes. And then 2 years in, I was promoted to all of Collateral. So I managed the appraisal team, title team, homeowners insurance team, and our project certification team. And I've been doing that for about 3 years now. And so it's been interesting stepping back a little bit from appraising and looking at mortgage lending more holistically.
Yeah, from the big picture, it's a whole lot different, isn't it?
It's a whole lot different than the very small finite picture, from the field.
Right.
So at times it was a little jarring and a lot of on-the-job training, but everything is working well. The wheels haven't come off the wagon yet, so I'm happy about that.
Well, good.
Yeah, it's been a great experience overall.
All right, well, let's jump right in. So, I think by now most appraisers are familiar with the Horton story that appeared in the New York Times. I believe it was this summer. Since this is our topic today, give our audience a recap of those events.
Sure, I'll give a recap from how I experienced those events. So I was on vacation when the New York Times article came out. It was the last week in August. I was supposed to be in Florida. COVID canceled the trip. And so I was just trying to rest up during a staycation and regroup because things were going very well. We were growing very rapidly, but when we got sent home due to the pandemic, I wasn't expecting my hours to extend. I was actually thinking they would compress. So literally I was sitting in my living room watching TV. I get a text message from a friend of mine with this article, and I read it and I thought to myself, yeah, I've done that as well. And Joan, literally, I did not think about that article again until I get back to work. So I think I received it, let's say Wednesday or Thursday. When I get to work on Monday, it is a #1 trending topic in our general Slack channel. And so now there are thousands of people in that channel, and topics tend to turn over rather quickly. And so people are asking like, oh, what's going on? Who should we contact about this? What's being done? Is this happening at Better? And so for those who didn't read the article, it walks you through the experiences of a Black woman by the name of Abana and her white husband, Alex. Abana was refinancing. The bank sent an appraiser to her property. The value of the appraisal came in very, very low, so much so that a second appraisal was ordered. And so in between the time of the first appraisal and the second appraisal, what she did is essentially erased herself from the home.
Right.
So she took down all of her family photos. She took down all pictures of their biracial son. She took down all Black art, so that when the second appraiser entered the home, he would think its inhabitants were white. And her inkling was that race has something to do with the low appraisal. And then when the second appraisal came back, it was, I think, $135,000 higher than the
Wow.
first.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's stunning. That's
It is stunning, but for me, it wasn't surprising, again, because my family has gone through this exercise of erasing ourselves from the home. And so it's only when I got back to work and the topic was still trending and people were asking questions that was the first time I actually took a step back and thought, like, wow, what does this actually mean? And also started leaning into, what does that do to a person? Because my family had done that like 10 years prior. We never spoke about it again. We never thought about it again. So it kind of, for me personally, opened up Pandora's box of thoughts and feelings that
you hadn't revisited in a while.
I hadn't revisited in a very long time.
Well, I tell you what, let's take a break right here and then we will revisit this, even though it may be a little painful. So Jim, you have a commercial message for us, I presume?
Thanks, Joan. As the provider of innovative appraisal solutions for more than 40 years, ACI is a trusted industry leader. Join the thousands of appraisers in many of the largest appraisal companies that use ACI software in the US and Canada to optimize their business. The ACI One Individual Plan is available today for $649 and includes forms and rules, sketch software, unlimited location and flood maps, public record data, ACI Open House, and more. For more information, visit aciweb.com. Joan, back to you.
Thank you, Jim. So Jillian, so tell us a little bit about your personal experiences in buying or selling real estate, or your family.
So before I became an appraiser, I was a real estate agent, and I held on to my license for a very long time. So I was like, I don't plan on listing anything or selling anything, but just in case. And so right after my parents retired, they thought about downsizing. Now, I knew they weren't going anywhere, which is why every time they talked about it, I wasn't volunteering to list their property. But finally, they demanded it. And I said, you're an agent, you're going to list our property. I said, okay. But before I took any of the listing photos and before I set up the broker's open house, before I did anything, I had a meeting with them. And I was like, look, we've had experiences within our family with my aunt and uncle who had a property sit on the market way beyond the normal marketing time. And I remember me and my mother checking in with my Aunt Gwen saying, hey, has there been any movement yet? And she was like, no. And we were so confused. My aunt has excellent taste. I'm not saying that as her niece. I'm saying that as an appraiser who knows marketability.
You've been in a lot of homes, right?
Yeah. So we couldn't figure out what it was. And then I remember seeing her a couple of weeks later and saying, any movement? She was like, yep. And we're closing tomorrow or something like that. And me and my mom were really curious. We're like, well, what was it? What happened? And she said her real estate agent pulled her aside and said, I think I know why your house isn't moving. It's because people know that the occupants are Black, and whether they are conscious of this or not, they don't want to buy a property after a Black family. So I recommend you start packing up early to help facilitate the sale. They were trying to leave everything as is because the marketability they thought would go up and people would be able to envision themselves in the home. So after my aunt and uncle took down all of their photos, all of their Black art, then all of a sudden they got an offer. And the thing is, like, there were multiple open houses, lots of interest, just never any offers being made, which was also very bizarre. So I went to my parents and, I was already kind of frustrated because I knew that there was a chance that they actually weren't going anywhere. But I said to them, okay, we're going to do this. I recommend you start packing up now, kind of like Aunt Gwen did with her property, to give the house a fighting chance. And so my parents agreed. And we went through the exercise of taking all of our pictures off the walls, all of our artwork off the walls.
Yeah.
And it's not only is it extremely time consuming, but I remember there's one standout picture in particular. I have a younger brother. He was born my senior year in high school. And after college, I moved back in with my parents, and I was really like a second mother, still am. And I remember coming across his kindergarten graduation photo and his little cap and gown, and having to take that picture off the wall. That one stung.
Right.
For that one, the tears welled up in my eyes. I got the lump in my throat, and I remember suppressing it and saying, you have a job to do. This was your idea. We're going to see it through to the end. And so we took everything down. And then like 2 weeks later, my parents changed their mind, and most of the pictures made it back up on the wall, but the house is forever changed. There was a photo gallery upstairs that they never put back up. So like the remnants of that exercise are still there to this day, but we never spoke about it. But now looking back, incredibly painful.
Well, I can't even imagine. So I suppose what you're saying is that, that had nothing to do with the appraisal process, but there's an awful lot of unconscious bias that, I'm sure there's a segment of the appraisal population that mirrors the general population that are out and out racists, but probably the more insidious influence are people who aren't even realizing that they're influenced by seeing pictures of Black people going, oh, that's a stigma. I don't want to live here. And that appraiser can have that same reaction. So let's go back to that story about Abena and Alex. So I was flabbergasted when you told me that you went to college with Abena. So stunning. I mean, I'm just shocked. And so tell us how that conversation went. And then that gave you a particularly interesting view that the rest of us haven't had into this particular instance.
Yeah, Joan, I'm flabbergasted by it too. I remember reading the New York Times article. I saw the picture, I saw the name, no connection. And then I remember getting ready for work, and she was being interviewed by Diane Sawyer on GMA. Still, absolutely no connection. It just so happened that about a week after the GMA interview, I was talking to an old college friend who I do not talk to often at all.
Right.
Maybe once every year, once every 2 years. And so we were chit-chatting, and then he asked me like, oh, how are things going with work? And I was like, work is good, but I have this new stressor because now there's racial bias and appraising, and people are asking me about it and trying to deal with that, while at the same time processing my own feelings and emotions around it. And he said, oh, you're talking about Abena's article. And the way he said her name so casually, and hearing her name come out of his mouth, it then clicked. And so he and I together said, oh, we went to Columbia together, and we were like the exact same class. And then I could picture her in time and space. And so he was friends with her and was still in contact. And so he said, hey, do you want me to give her your contact information? I was like, yes, please. And she remembered me, I remembered her. And we started talking, and I got like the inside scoop of like what led to the New York Times article, what it felt like for her as well. There's a lot of overlap in our experiences. And then at one point I asked her, I was like, look, Abena, I'm an appraiser. This is what I do for a living. Would you feel comfortable sharing the appraisal reports with me? And she said yes. And then I had the opportunity to actually see the reports that kind of kicked off this
All right. Well, that's a cliffhanger. So
oh, okay.
I'm gonna go back to Jim here, and then we're gonna come back, and you're gonna tell the story about the two appraisals.
Okay, great.
Jim?
Yeah, great job on the cliffhanger. So appraisers, if you've grown frustrated with endlessly pursuing new appraisal work and not reaping any of the benefits, Metro West is here to help. They understand and work to alleviate the pain points commonly felt by appraisers to enable personal and financial growth for their staff. After all, they've been owned and operated by appraisers since the company opened in 1987. Metro West Appraisal is an equal opportunity employer, and they're always looking for certified residential real estate appraisers to join their team. Visit metrowestappr.com/careers or email careers@metrowestappr.com. Joan?
Thank you, Jim. So, Jillian, in your own words, tell us, when you looked at both appraisals, what did you see?
Before I looked at both appraisals, just by asking Abhinav a few basic questions, I knew something was going on with the reports because, appraisal reports come across my desk, the borrower is upset, they think it's worth more. At this point, I have a real system for answering those questions. And so before I even got my hands on the reports, I just asked her a couple of things, and I was like, well, that doesn't add up. And then after seeing the reports, I was very interested to see if both appraisers handle GLA and bedroom count and bathroom count in the same way. Maybe the lot size was different in one versus the other. And to her credit, she was very open. She was like, look, if my instincts on this are incorrect, please let me know. She was like, don't sugarcoat it for me. And I was like, no worries about that. If I think that there isn't anything bias related going on here, and it's just truly two very differing opinions, I will let you know. But after reviewing it, I'm still not able to connect the dots as to how the first appraiser came up with the valuation. It took so much more work to come in with a lower one.
Number. Wow. So, and is that the reason? I mean, so I know the accusation has been made by some in the appraisal community that perhaps the first appraiser was just incompetent and not biased. It was just, he didn't know what he was doing. What is it about comparing the two that made you come to the conclusion that racial bias was involved here?
Well, Joan, I hesitate to say that I can say definitively that it was racial bias, but what I always like to say is if it wasn't racial bias, I have no idea as to what it was.
What he was thinking, yeah.
Yeah. And again, as appraisers, we know we want our comps to be recent and proximate. Basics. So when you don't go recent and you don't go proximate, or you don't go as recent and as proximate as the comparables were available to you, you have to skip over other ones. It just raises a question, what was going on? Why? And I wish I could see the CU scores on these reports, because I have to believe the CU score for one is sky high and the CU score for another is lower. Literally, it just took more effort to write the first report to create a narrative for a lower value. It wasn't casual, it wasn't easy, it had to be
a lot of work. Yeah.
And so what led the appraiser to be so confident that he should go out of his way to make a case for a lower valuation? And so if it isn't race, I'm unclear as to what else it could have been.
Did he by chance select, so I presume that Abena and Alex's neighborhood, is it a mixed race neighborhood? Is it predominantly white or?
Oh, that is a good question. I don't know. I haven't asked her.
Well, so the question I was going to ask is, and maybe you don't have enough information to answer, did the first low appraisal, did he go over to a Black neighborhood to select Black owned real estate? Or you don't know?
I don't know. Looking at the natural neighborhood boundaries, I think it's safe to say that both of the comparables were picked from within what I would consider to be the same neighborhood without knowing that market. However, if you have a comp that's a quarter mile away, there's no reason to go for the comp that's a mile away unless that comp that's a mile away is more recent. But for it to be further away and dated, and for you to skip over the quarter mile comp that is recent, it just goes against everything we're taught as appraisers.
Right.
And the comps were very, very similar. Bracketing was very similar. It's just one had recent proximate comps and the other did not.
Did not. Wow. Okay. So, to that end, we had the CRN webinar a few weeks back, and Lisa Rice with the Fair Housing Coalition mentioned her experience, and this is of course in the last crisis, that, she observed just a large number of minority homes that were overvalued, and that it was a predatory lending situation. And then now today we're talking about a case where a Black homeowner's home was undervalued. My conclusion is any kind of bias, up or down, racial or otherwise, is just heinous. And we have to have a process, and a more expeditious one than what we have, to vet these particular situations so that we can provide immediate and proper and expeditious oversight. Any thoughts on solutions to this problem? Because, making a complaint to a state board might get you satisfaction 6 months down the road, but if you have a pending transaction, you're going to lose the property that you made an offer on, or you're not going to get your great rate on your refi, et cetera. What are your thoughts on this?
Joan, I think the very first step is, in order to solve for a problem, you have to admit that there is a problem. And so there has been a lot of pushback, which initially I did not understand, even to being open to the possibility of there being bias. And I started getting very curious as to why that is, because from my perspective, it just wasn't adding up. But I think there is a disconnect with how terms and words are being defined. I think the white community, when they hear bias then equals racism equals bad person. And in the context of appraisers fighting against this idea of being bad people, then I got it. And as an appraiser, I would be insulted too if somebody's like, oh, you came in and you intentionally undervalued my home because of the color of my skin. However, speaking from the Black community, intent on our side doesn't even really factor into it at all. It's just, we're all humans and we all have biases. So then to say, I have zero unconscious bias and this isn't showing up, I think it makes it very difficult for the conversation to even get started. But again, from the Black community, that's not what's being said. There's something running in the background. And so to that end, I think the very first solution is to get really familiar with what your biases are. We all have them. How are they showing up? How could they possibly be showing up in your data? And then how to combat it. And so that's one step that I think the entire appraiser community could take to help rectify this immediately. Another step would be having representation within the appraiser community that looks like the community that's being served. So we know it's skewed heavily male, it's skewed heavily white. Just getting things in balance so that there is, equal representation of the population being served, I think would go a long way as well. And then there are much more longer term, ways of tackling this almost at the systemic level. And I'm still trying to wrap my head around what that looks like and what the solutions are. I don't know yet, but like in the immediate term, if we could just move away from this like good person, bad person conversation, like nobody's saying appraisers are bad people.
I think you've nailed it, because, before the CRN webinar that we had, that you participated in, I had some conversations with folks who I deem to be leaders in the appraisal community, and said, what is your reaction to this? They didn't want to hear it. They didn't want to open their minds or their hearts, because exactly what you said, all appraisers have now been painted as racists. That's their perception. And having sat in that congressional hearing where one of the congressmen accused the entire panel and said all appraisers are racists, that was indeed pretty outlandish statement. And so I felt attacked. And so, yeah, I get it, because I can completely relate to that. So, yeah, I think we need to take our guard down and have an open and honest discussion. And I too think we need to have a little update on fair housing laws. You know, most of us got that lecture early on. You know, might have been a paragraph or two in some of our training. I think we need to revisit that and maybe modernize the way we approach that training as well. Because one of the unconscious ways I see how an appraiser could unconsciously be biased in the appraisal process is if I have a Black owned home in let's say predominantly Black neighborhood, and I don't have any comps in that neighborhood, I'm going to go find another Black neighborhood to pick my comps without even thinking that I'm a racist. It's similar demographics.
Yeah, all under the name of similar marketability and
Right.
appeal to the common and typical buyer.
Right. So, you know, I think some of the stuff that we're talking about, neighborhoods and that raises a lot of red flags for steering the comp selection. No different than steering buyers in a buying situation. So I think, yeah, there's a lot of work to be done here, and we got to continue this conversation. And I just want to thank you for joining us today, shedding a little light on this from your perspective, and hopefully everybody can learn a little bit from it, and we can have some continued conversation. So thanks, Jillian.
You're very welcome. Thank you, Joan.
In uncertain times, you need a certain partner. You don't have to sacrifice top-notch coverage for an affordable premium. Intercorp has all the options and is sure to have just the right one to fit your specific needs. They provide the appraisal profession with competitive, best-in-class E&O coverage solutions nationwide. Having served the insurance needs of the industry for more than 25 years, Intercorp understands the risks you face every day. Whether you're an individual appraiser, appraisal firm, residential, commercial, or an AMC, visit intercorpinc.net to get a competitive quote today. Thank you so much, Jillian and Joan, for this important conversation. I know it's a really important conversation. So appraisers, let us know in the comments what you think about today's Buzzcast. And like I said before, subscribe if you haven't already. Thank you both and have a great day.